Okay, so we're talking about Thomas Hobbes, Leviathan, um, and basically, as I said, okay, we're talking about sort of strategic compromise. How do I change my theory based on what I think? How do I change my strategy? How do I adopt my strategy based on what I think your strategy is, and vice versa? You're obviously doing the same thing. This is kind of what we call game theory. Um, so you also may be familiar with the prisoner's dilemma that I'll use as an example. Uh, Basically, the idea, and so we can apply this to ethics. A lot of ethics has to do with this kind of, strategic compromise of who holds the power and what ultimate decision is going to make, and how do I maximize my end goal depending on what everybody else is trying to do. That's very abstract. We'll try to unpack that. But why do I think it applies to ethics? And I might have given you this example when we were talking about Kant. So let me try to unpack this point. Okay, there's really kind of 2 points that I'll make. The first point is a pretty broad point. But we said with Immanuel Kant, it says he's you do the right thing for the right reason. That's kind of as simply as you can put it with Kant. You're doing the right thing for the right reason. Okay, so Kant was talking about doing something with a good intention. Then we talked about utilitarianism. And sometimes what Kant would say is with utilitarianism is you're doing the right thing for the wrong reason. In other words, you're not doing it with the correct intention. Now, if we're looking at it from what Thomas Hobbes is saying, what Thomas Hobbes is going to say is basically sometimes you have to do the wrong thing for the right reason. Okay, that's what we're going to be talking about with Hobbes and with Machiavelli. Now, let me try to put that kind of very concretely. Okay, and this is something that you can consider with regards to your presentation and with regards to the complexities of the underlying issues that you're addressing in your presentation. Let me try to put it this way: is from a kind of I think I already made this point, but let's say from a Kantian point of view, suppose you're selling arms to Saudi Arabia or any other region that is involved in potential human rights atrocities. From a utilitarian perspective, you would say, well, I'm going to do it because I stand to benefit. And either way, that kind of this is a kind of a rationalization in morality. You say, well, either way, the weapons are going to be sold, so I might as well be the one that sells the weapons. Okay, but Kant is going to say, no, on principle, let's say I'm not going to support any faction or any state which is engaging in potential human rights violations. So on principle, I'm not going to sell weapons to them. But this is the point. This is where kind of what we're looking at is sometimes you have to do the wrong thing for the right reason. Is what Hobbes is going to say, sure, idealistically, that's very, very good. Okay. And Machiavelli is going to say the same thing as well. Sometimes your idealistic or your utopian vision, what Kant is saying, that is what should be informing and should be driving your actions. What that does is it puts you in a compromised position. Let me try to put that as simply as possible. Okay, I'm not going to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia because it violates my practices. It violates my principles. But now that's not really going to change anything because my competitor is going to sell the weapons, which I'm not selling, and I consequently now lose out on more of the market share. I have less profit. He has more profit, and so he's now in a dominant position. So, in some sense, it's very problematic because you don't want to compromise, but by not compromising, you're not really addressing the underlying problem. Okay, the weapons are still going to be sold. And now, furthermore, you've empowered, in a way, you've indirectly, by stepping aside, you've empowered somebody, your competitor, let's say, who doesn't have those principles at all. So in some sense, you've actually made the situation worse. Okay, so that's kind of what I want you to think about, that kind of game theory. Okay, how do I manage my strategy based on the foreseeable outcomes and the strategy of my opponents? And what Hobbes is talking about is basically, how does this apply to societal level? Okay, why are we even in a society at all? What Hobbes is going to say is, we are all basically egoistic individuals. We are all self-interested, rationalistic individualists to some degree. So how do we arrive at a society? What Hobbes is going to say is, he's really applying it to the question of why do we even get along at all? And basically what he's going to say is, even though we are rational egoists that seek out our own advantage, we realize that there is a mutual gain in collaboration and cooperation. So there's a possibility of, let's say, you can talk about a lose-lose scenario. You can talk about I win and you lose, you win and I lose. How can you structure it in such a way that you may potentially get a win-win scenario, which is the best all-round scenario? Okay, but sometimes the win-win scenario is very difficult to obtain because it requires, to put it very simply, it requires trust. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That's kind of something that we're going to be talking about with Hobbes, with Machiavelli, doing the wrong thing for the right reason. Okay, hold on here. Let me get this order. Okay, so he writes a book called The Leviathan, and in it, basically, he's considering two different sort of hypothetical possibilities. He's asking us to imagine this kind of historical thought experiment. What was it like before we lived in an organized civilization? What was humanity like before we lived in an organized civilization? And he says, in this sort of hypothetical historical epoch, we are maximally free. Okay, you're free to do whatever you want. You are only limited by your own, basically your own devices, your own strength. Okay, your own capacity to charm or to deceive or to outwit, or even your own brutality. Okay, your strength, however that is measured. But he says that is what he calls the state of nature. You are there in the state of nature. You are maximally free, but at the same time, there are no rules. There are no rights. There's no point in talking about rights or rules. A rule or a right is something that can be enforced. And so there has to be a sort of a backing there. So he says we want to transition from that to basically what he calls a civil state. Basically, let's get along. Let's see what happens if we work together for an optimal outcome. But that requires something. And this is the second point that I wanted to make. I kind of delayed there, but just consider this. What he's going to basically say is, what is in you as an individual, you are always seeking your best interest. There's always something operating there. And what he's going to say is, to actually obtain the best result for you, you may actually have to take into consideration the needs and the desires of other people. So just let me try to put that very simply. It's a little bit paradoxical. In order to get the best result for me, I have to abandon the pursuit of the outright best result for me. If I pursue what is best for me at the cost of what is at the cost of everybody else, I may end up in actually not the optimal result for me. So what he's going to say, that's very interesting, and it's very how he gets there. The argument is kind of scary because it's kind of very crude and very simplistic, and there's truth to it. But the conclusion is quite good. It's very interesting that in order to get the best result for you, guess what? You have to take into consideration other people. If you only take into consideration for yourself, you're actually going to end up with not the best result for you, which is paradoxical. Okay, so a good egoist is intelligent and is willing to compromise and collaborate and work with other people, because that's where you stand to maximally gain. Okay, if you have any questions or if anything's unclear, just cut me off. So let's get right into it. Okay, I want to go through this very quickly. This is based on a basic assumption about human nature, and I think it's partly a fair assumption, that human beings are rational egoists, and I want you to keep that in mind. We have the capacity to reason, and by this we can understand it as a kind of a utilitarian algorithm that happens in our heads. Okay, we are able to weigh costs and benefits, and we have a kind of foresight in a way. We are able to, in some sense, predict some of the consequences of our actions and how they will impact us, how they will impact other people. And secondly, we are self-interested. We are, rational egoists. We seek to attain what we desire, and this is ordered in a specific rank here. He says nothing is quite as motivating. We are motivated by gain. We are motivated by wealth and acquisition. We are motivated by status and reputation. But what Hobbes is going to say, and you can question him or not, I agree with a lot of what Hobbes has to say. He's going to say one of the things that really motivates us more than anything else is security. Nothing is quite as motivating as a fear of a violent death. Okay, fear of a violent death is a very, very motivating thing. Okay, I want to again try to stay short and sweet here. So again, he's talking about why do we move as being individuals to building a kind of a community or society or a civilization? What's the underlying sort of psychology and dynamics there between individuals? Okay, so what Hobbes is going to say is we are not naturally social beings. That's kind of what Aristotle is going to say. We are inherently social beings. What Hobbes is going to say is, in some sense, we are accidentally social beings. We work together, not because it's kind of innate, but we work together because we realize that there's some utility, there's some productivity in collaboration. But again, even though he's talking about sort of societal formations and creating these groups and group dynamics, what I want you to really understand is the underlying mechanism of, let me try to put it this way, okay? Imagining again, the person, in a kind of a pre-civilization era of human history. I'm on this side of the river, you're on that side of the river. I don't have a kind of a bloodlust, okay? I'm not inherently violent. It's not like, some of you have seen the movie The Purge. It's not like The Purge, that as soon as you remove laws, everybody becomes kind of crazy and violent, and they have this kind of thirst for sadistic behavior. That's not quite right. That's kind of an exaggerated caricature of it. But basically, I'm not inherently violent, but if there's a person on the other side of the river that now just shows up as a kind of a stranger, and I start to assess that this person might be violent, it's basically, then it's in your best interest to be preemptively violent. Okay, again, I'm using that example of kill or be killed, which is how he formulates it, but it can apply to anything. Okay, it can apply to economics, it can apply to pricing strategies, it can apply to investment strategies. You understand? So that's what I want you to retain and potentially apply if you understand it to apply to the presentation. So I don't necessarily want to kill you, and I hope that you don't want to kill me. Okay, kill me and basically take all my stuff. But if I think that you are violent, then that puts me at a disadvantage, and I'm going to be preemptively violent, sort of defensively or offensively, in order to counter your violence. Think about it like a chess game. You know what I mean? My move is dependent on what I think your move is going to be, what your response is going to be, and it sort of becomes a kind of an iterated function, which becomes very, very complex. All right. Let me try to say one more thing here, and then there's a few things I need to unpack. So kind of what strategies work? And there's actually computer scientists that have done these kind of game theory strategies of, sort of game of, let's say, if a simple one that they do, kind of economic behavior is, I have a $10 bill, and I have to decide how you're going to split it. And we only get to split the $10 bill if you also agree on how I've decided to split it. So you would think naturally people would say, okay, $10, I keep $5, you get $5, we both win, and it's not complicated. Okay, but what you actually get is the person who actually makes the decision to split is usually going to split it like 7-3 or 8-2. And now you, as a person, you have no choice on how it's split. You just have a choice on whether you're going to accept it or not accept it. And in some sense, even though it's always in your interest to accept the split, even if he gives you 9-1 because you're going to make $1, you might say no. I'm going to say but if I say 9-1 and I'm going to give him $1, he might be offended by that, and he might say no, and I consequently won't get my $9 either. You know what I mean? So how far are you willing to push it, depending on sort of the power dynamics? And this is the point that I want to make, is there are basically two main strategies, but these are very simplistic strategies. The first strategy is always an egoist, okay? I'm always going to play the hand in a way that is going to benefit me outright, and if I can screw you over, I will, okay? I'm always going to screw you over if that potential arises. Let me put it here, okay? And then go back. Okay, I'm always going to not trust you and take advantage of your trust. I'm always going to take advantage of every opening of trust that you give me. Okay, that actually works for quite a bit. It's a strategy that works. If you play the sort of the computer simulation models, it works for quite a bit. It actually works better than always be willing to cooperate. Okay, always altruistic, always altruistic. And then you can say, well, how can you modify the strategy based on past track record? So if and then you kind of play what you call tit for tat. I'm willing to cooperate with you until you screw me over. And once you screw me over, then I'm going to screw you over either permanently. Okay, that's the aggressive tit for tat. That's the kind of, vindictive model. Or you can say, for every round that you've screwed me over, I'm going to screw you over on the subsequent round until you stop screwing me over, and then I'm gonna start collaborating again. Okay, and that what you get is a kind of there's a kind of a corrective there. There's a punishment. You're willing to punish the person that has that you've perceived as doing wrong to you. That's very abstract. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So I don't know, like this came across in my head the other day. Looking at the sort of disposable plates in the grocery store, and you have the paper plates, which are obviously better for the environment, and you have the styrofoam plates. But now I don't know what the underlying thinking was. Was it basically nobody wants styrofoam plates, so either the store manager says, consequently, I'm going to adjust my strategy as a result of the demand, and therefore the price of the styrofoam plates was ridiculous compared to the paper plates. The paper plates was like gold, in terms of pricing. The styrofoam plates were like a fifth the price. You know what I mean? So it's like, what's the underlying strategy here? Is this the styrofoam company that is strategically pricing this way to sort of compete? Okay, or is it the store manager that says, look, I have all this stock and nobody wants it and nobody's making it anymore, so let me just kind of liquidate it. So you hopefully get the point. Let's back up here a little bit. This is an important point. Okay, more of a kind of the societal dimension of it. For Aristotle, I've postponed the lecture on Aristotle, but when we talk about Aristotle is going to say what we seek is the optimal result. Okay, and what Hobbes is going to say is no. You don't want the optimal. It's not that you resist the optimal result. Obviously, you want the optimal result if it can be obtained. But he says what your primary directive should not be the optimal result. Should just be keep the boat afloat. Okay, so Aristotle would want the speedboat. Okay, this society built upon excellence. It's a well-oiled machine. Everybody has a task. Everybody knows what they're doing. Okay, Hobbes is going to say, yeah, sure, if we can attain it, good. But that should not be, the primary directive. Primary directive shouldn't be the speedboat. The primary directive should be, let's at least keep the boat afloat so that we don't all sink and drown. Okay. Let me try to put it this way. What Aristotle is going to say is, we want to obtain an optimal society. And to attain an optimal society, you give the best among us what they need in order to excel. Okay. What Hobbes is going to say is, no, what you want to do is not create the optimal society. You want to create a minimally functional society. And to do that, you have to prevent the worst among us from running amok and destroying everything. Okay. So you can ask ourselves, well, what society are we in? In some sense, it's a little bit of both. Okay. There are good investments that are made in where we allow the best among us, the smartest among us, the brightest among us to really excel and hopefully, progress in terms of science and technology and humanity and, living conditions and so on. We do have that to some extent in our society, but we also have the Hobbesian aspect, which is a lot of time and money and resources and energy is basically allocated to things like militarism, police, judicial system, penitentiary system, and so on. So while a good chunk of what we do is we're able to allocate it to progress, a lot of what we do is allocated to basically just maintaining a minimal social order. That's the key word, maintaining a minimal social order. And as you see, trust is very important. As trust erodes, basically, people start to hedge their bets. They can say, well, I'm not going to invest in society. I'm going to basically, keep the money for myself. I'm going to start hoarding or whatever. And then it becomes a kind of a vicious spiral. Distrust begets more distrust, and trust gets more trust. Okay. So just keep that in mind. Let me see if there's anything else that I want to say there. So the point is, if you have a society that starts to have a crumbling social order, that social order starts to sort of accelerate. You have to be very careful. And if you end up in, a position of civil war, you have a collapse of the civil state. You basically relapse into what he calls the state of nature. And he says there is no progress, there is no industry, there is no advancement. So we all lose. Okay. Any questions, comments? No? Let me speed things up here. I'm going to try to finish. Okay. So he says, again, the two basic assumptions there are, we are all rational egoists. We are all intelligent, number one. Number two is self-interested. And here's number three. Very interesting. He says, we are all equal. We are all equal in the sense that nobody can amass so much power that you are exempt of the rules of this game. Okay? Because anybody can always plot against you, or any group of people can basically plot and conspire against you, so that nobody is exempt from this game. So everybody, in some sense, has to always be watching over their shoulder, okay? Literally or figuratively. Now, let me see, what's the point here? The point is, what he's going to say is, all that looking over your shoulder is time and energy spent, and anxiety as well. That can be, all that energy can be redirected towards something else. Once you are appeased, and you no longer feel as though there's a threat looming, and you always have to look over your shoulder. Okay. So again, think about all the money that we spend on security, we spend on military, we spend on police. If you think about just, the United States military budget, could, we can educate the whole country, and we can solve the issue of starvation, in many areas of the world, just the U.S. military budget alone. Another one is, let's say, you think about nuclear warfare and deterrence. That is very, very much game theory strategy. Okay, I'm not going to disarm until you disarm, and if we disarm, we have to have almost a kind of a third party there, which is going to ensure that we are disarming at the same rate. Because if you trust that I'm disarming, but I'm not disarming, meanwhile you're disarming, now all of a sudden I have a strategic edge on you. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why it's a kind of a paradoxical thing that keeps nuclear weapons in check, is what you call nuclear deterrence, which is basically the threat, the kind of the theory of mutual self-destruction. I'm not going to destroy you because it's almost probable, it's almost guaranteed that it's going to result in my destruction or severe destruction to me as well. Therefore, the button is always there, but nobody ever dares touch it. Okay. So you get this game theory. Okay. Either one of us can trust or not trust. So if we don't trust, then one or both of us gets killed. If I trust you, but you don't trust me, then my trust leaves me vulnerable. Very important idea. Being an ethical person, being a moral person, requires this degree of trust, which in turn makes you vulnerable. Okay. And similarly, if I don't trust you, but you trust me, I can take advantage of that as well. It creates an opening. Okay. So he says what we should be looking forward to is this sort of trust outcome. And this is, we get a potentially win-win scenario. But so let me give you a kind of a simplified version of the prisoner's dilemma. Prisoner's dilemma is, suppose you rob a bank and you're back at your hideout, and the police break in and arrest you. And as the police are arresting you, you sort of look at each other and you say, don't tell them nothing, they don't know anything. Okay, so you're going in with that strategy. You and your accomplice, the bank robbers, you agree on a strategy, which is keep your mouth shut. They don't know anything. Okay, we covered our trail. And now the police is going to interrogate you separately, and they're going to try to get a confession out of you. And one of the ways that they're going to try to get a confession out of you is to try to get you to believe that the other person already ratted you out. Okay, don't trust your your companion. And they're going to do the same thing with the other guy. Okay, and they're going to give you a kind of a deal. They're going to say, look, don't trust him. Okay, he's a loser, whatever. You tell us what happened, and we'll let you free, and we'll give him the maximum sentence. Screw him over for your best interest. So I screw him over, I get 0 years in prison, or I get like a misdemeanor, like 6 months, and he's going to get like 5 years. Okay. But they're giving the same deal to the other guy. Okay. So now if we both don't talk, we're both going to get like a trespassing nothing, if we both don't talk. That would be the win-win situation for us. All right. If I talk, I get a better circumstance and you get the full hit. If you talk, but I don't talk, you get the better circumstance and I get the full hit. But what the police wants to do, which is actually the likely outcome, is we're both going to rat each other out, and then we're both going to be screwed hard. We're going to both be screwed over very, very hard. Okay. So the win-win scenario, which is the optimal scenario, in some cases is actually not the likely scenario, because it becomes very difficult to maintain that degree of mutual trust. Okay, it has to be mutual trust. It has to be simultaneous trust. It can't be one-way trust. Okay. Let me skip over this. This is kind of the societal thing. I'm going fast here. So this is a quote. Okay, just again, this is kind of the sociological thing. But what do you stand to gain, and what do you stand to lose by trusting? Consider, let me just, because it's on my mind. It's been on my mind since before. Consider the example of, let's say, claims of fraudulent elections. Okay, that undermines. You know what I mean? It's there was a chance, and there was actually, to some extent, a degree of civil war. It didn't turn into civil war. Let's look, United States elections that just passed, 2020 United States election, presidential election. The erosion of trust. So that's kind of a strategic thing. One party is saying the election was rigged because it's in their interest to say that. That's their only strategic way to try to retain any degree of power and get people to believe in that. In doing that, you are undermining the stability of the whole institution, of that whole governmental institution. Okay, so that can kind of augment to the point where you have an erosion of trust that's so bad that you end up basically with a societal collapse. You end up with a failed state. And that's what happened in some places. People call foul after an election and it never really gets resolved. You basically get warring factions with their own version of reality. Okay, which is crazy. She says, what do we stand to gain by leaving what he calls the state of nature? By working together, and what do we stand to look forward to by staying in the state of nature? It says, in such conditions, that is the state of nature, where it's basically each man for himself. In such condition, there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, no use of commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear, danger of a violent death, and the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Okay? So these are all the things that we stand to lose when societal trust is eroded. Okay, art, advancement, technology, science, industry, infrastructure. Okay, so it could be. Let me try to put it this way: And this goes back to the whole fairy scene that I mentioned with Batman and the Dark Knight, okay? There's an element of game theory there too. I don't want to blow you up, but if I think that you're going to blow me up, then I would rather blow you up than be blown up, okay? But there's another dimension there. There's the game theory dimension that Hobbes is talking about, but there's another dimension. What Hobbes is basically saying is this, and we're in some sense very fortunate, many of us, that we've never experienced anything like this, but this is a fact throughout human history. Basically, let me try to put it very simply, is the fragility of civility, okay? That, as I said earlier, once trust starts to go out the window, and once trust becomes the losing strategy, in other words, you become a sucker for being somebody who is a trusting person, turns you into a sucker, then this whole veil of civility, what Hobbes is basically warning us of, is this whole veil of civility and societal, cohesion and order. A few things go wrong, and people start to, loot and break windows, and you start to kind of relapse into an anarchy. Okay, so that maybe that's something that you can kind of entertain, but just think about, what has to go wrong for basically, the government to fall apart, or there to be martial law, or for the for the stock market to crash. And it's probably not as fail-safe as you think it is. You know what I mean? Even if you think about, let's say, we don't talk about it anymore, but if you talk about, let's say, the Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis, you get really close to really undermining the social order. Like one rogue bomb gets launched because one crazy, general decided that day, he had a kind of a psychosis, and you're in World War III. So this is it's a bit heavy, okay, but there's an element of realism to this, which is kind of undeniable. Okay. Let me get to the next good part here. I'm going through. So we said, what from a societal perspective, what's the solution here? And the solution, he says, we need to have a sovereign. The sovereign is this overseer. So this is the original cover of the book, The Leviathan. Okay, the Leviathan is kind of this biblical monster. So he says the government is a kind of a Leviathan. It is the overseer. Okay, and what you see of the Leviathan is that he is composed of his constituents. He is composed of basically all of the people. That the power of the Leviathan is nothing other than the power of the people. And this is basically what it looks like. He says, a few things I want to say here. From a societal or governance perspective. This Leviathan is formed when we all collectively surrender some of our rights. Okay, we do that in terms of obedience and compliance to certain laws. We do that through forms of, funding, in terms of taxation, in terms of, we either pay into it or we participate in it. Like, let's say a police officer or, a soldier, or you pay your taxes. We are all paying into this archy, okay? This system, which is the reason why the sovereign works, is because it is stronger than any one of us, okay? And its basic job is to maintain a minimal social order. Does that mean that you are then crime-free? No, you can always slip under the radar of the Leviathan, okay? You can still be, there's still kind of grand theft auto and, organized crime and so on. You can still commit a crime and not get caught. But the idea is here that punishment is this idea that punishment is going to be a deterrence to crime. Okay, the prospect that you will get caught, and your assessment of the probability of getting caught, okay, basically maintains a general social order. And what he says is, it doesn't matter what form it takes. So it basically, you just have to have it working. Okay, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, you can try to improve on it, but it's like he says, it doesn't matter what form it takes. This overarching government. It can be a monarchy. It can be a fascist government. It can be a totalitarian government. It can be a representative democracy. It can be a constitutional democracy. It can be a republic. It can be run by a supercomputer, like we have in some science fiction films. You have this kind of this artificial intelligence that is basically going to be the governing authority of that society. Is going to be the lawmaker and the enforcer. He's going to say it doesn't matter what form it takes. You have to have the overseer, and the overseer is a big ego, which is more powerful than any given ego that is its constituents. And therefore, if you come and steal from me, then it's basically just might makes right. Okay, if you're in the state of nature, it's my power versus your power. If you're able to overpower me, then you get it. But it doesn't work in this case, because if you come and, let's say, try to steal from me, then I can also, it's kind of an insurance policy. You can always call upon, you call 911 or whatever form it takes. You call upon the Leviathan, say, this guy stole from me. And you always have this kind of big brother, I guess, but then there's the danger of the big brother, because that authority figure can also become crazy. You know what I mean? So let me try to put that two ways. If you think about it in terms of corporation, a corporation is a kind of a monolithic, egoistic entity, which is its own sort of form of governance. There is nobody in a corporation that can dictate the direction of the corporation. Okay, it's not like the CEO of McDonald's can come and say, okay, let's try this year to reduce our carbon footprint, or let's try to reduce the amount of waste that we produce. The bottom line is, well, what's the cost? What's the cost to us? And if you're going to try to push it, then guess what? You're going to be fired as a CEO, and you're going to be replaced with somebody that is in line with the underlying will of this entity, which is the corporation. Okay. Same thing with a nation state. The nation state is itself, when you are in the nation and you are, a constituent of that nation state, you are under the watchful eyes of the overseer, whether it be, the Canadian government or the American government. Okay. But now think about it in terms of international politics. At the level of international politics, you do not have this overseeing body. You have the United Nations. But, if you look at, let's say the Security Council, you have people, you have countries, let's say Russia and the United States with their veto power, that are just going to veto whatever does not align with their interests. So the United Nations does not have the means to enforce any legislation. You can have sanctions which work, economic sanctions. But my point is, at the international level, you can look at all these nations as being sort of themselves egoists, competing egoists, and there is no higher order. You can have, let's say, some assemblies. Like you can have, let's say, the European Union and so on. But even there, you see, you have kind of games that go on, people that are refusing to take immigrants based on their quota and so on. So they're in the union, but nonetheless, they are trying to squeeze out the best piece of the pie that they can while still remaining in the union. Okay. And furthermore, if a government becomes tyrannical, then he says, we are the authors. We authorize the sovereign, and therefore we have the authority to overwrite it or replace it with something else. Okay, I guess that's good. Okay, I think I basically captured it there. Let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to say. So just keep that in mind if that's applicable to your presentation. It's a very interesting and very pragmatic analysis. It's a very realistic analysis. Okay, we can always talk about the way the world ought to be, but this and Machiavelli is kind of, well, where are we starting from? Who are the players? What's the strategy here? And how can we move towards a strategy that is going to be in line with reality and facts and things that are beneficial to all of us? You know what I mean? It's in, let's say, oil companies' best interest, as we talked about last class. Climate change denialism and misinformation. It's in their best interest to strategically fund that. Okay, but is it in our best interest? So how do you counter that? For example, Let me see if there's something else I don't want to say there. Let me just start concluding it here. So basically, let me make this point. Think about it in terms of, this is one way to look at it. It's not the only way. You think about, let's say, social stability as a function of economic and wealth distribution. That's one way, an interesting way to look at it. What we call the Genie Index. What is the wealth gap in a given society, and how does the wealth gap affect rates of criminality and homicide and suicide, and how does the wealth gap potentially, lead to civil unrest? So they say, okay, they're poor, and their poor is scary because now they're going to get hungry, and once they start getting hungry, they're going to maybe come knocking on our door. Or you say they're too poor and they're too hungry that they can't even begin to entertain the idea of a rebellion. So okay, that's good. You know what I mean? Now we got them in a great position, because in order to rebel, you have to be, you have to be minimally fed. If you're too hungry, you don't even have the energy to think about rebelling. So that's one way to play it. But so consider that, okay? If you consider what's going on, let's say, in some very, very poor areas in some countries. Like I was in Haiti, and we drove through Cité Soleil, which is the poorest neighborhood in all of the Americas, if I'm not mistaken. And it's surprising, it's shocking that there's this level of poverty where people are living in basically shantytown shangles. There's no electricity, there's no sewage, and then you look at the people up on the hill and they live in very, very nice houses. Or you look at a place like Baltimore where you have affluent neighborhoods, and you drive, half a mile, and you're in basically, an inner city. It's all boarded up, and there's nothing going on, and there's high rates of, drug abuse and crime. At one point, you can ask, if you're the person on the hill, you say, one of these, they might come knocking, and you might say, go fuck yourself. You're not, everybody for themselves. Okay, I don't have to care for you. And they might come asking, with pity. Next time they come asking, they come knocking on your door, they might not be so merciful. Okay, they might come, like a French Revolution style. So my point is, with regards to that, how do you play your strategy? Let's say if you're wealthy, if you're excessively wealthy, one game that you can play is, I know how the world works, and every man is out for themselves. So I don't care. And the strategy is, let me fortify my castle. Let me buy some guns, or let me invest in, 10-foot high electric fencing. Let me invest in security. Let me invest in security guards. Let us invest in a kind of a compound with a perimeter and security guards and, neighborhood watch. You can play that game to some degree. Or you can play the game of, okay, let me be a philanthropist and let me address the fundamental causes which are giving me, which may present a danger. Okay. So you can ask all kinds of, how does poverty lead to radicalization? Whether it be domestically or in another nation. And then what strategy do you take? So let me give you one personal example. Is you can live in South Africa, and you can live your wealth would probably count for a lot more there. You can live in a much bigger house and drive a nicer car, but you're going to be living behind basically a gated compound. Or you can live in Canada where you don't really have to lock your doors. Okay, if I forget to lock my door and I'm already, let's say, 500 meters away from home, I'm not going to turn around. Okay, I usually don't lock the door to my car. That usually doesn't cause a problem. Okay, I'm not going to say that there's no crime. Yeah, there was one time I didn't lock my car door and the police gave me a ticket. I found a ticket on my car seat. You know what I mean? That was more damaging than any theft that I've received as a result of leaving my car door unlocked. Now, that's not true for other nations. You know what I mean? I was in France. I was in Paris a long time ago, and I was speaking to a Brazilian girl that was there, and she says, "Is it true in Canada you don't have to lock your doors?" And I said, "Well, we lock our doors, but I hadn't really thought about it." I said, "It's not that we necessarily leave them unlocked, but yes, you're correct. Very often I do leave my door unlocked." And she said that, well, that's a very different reality. She says, because everybody I know in Brazil has been robbed at gunpoint. Everybody I know has been robbed at gunpoint. Okay, I think she was from Sao Paulo or something like that. So yeah, it's a very different reality. Okay, so how do you calibrate your strategy? Strategic compromise. And basically, I'm not going to go into this too much. Let me end this here. But basically, the implications, as I mentioned, of being a morally good person is that you become a trusting person. But becoming a trusting person makes you vulnerable. Being a moral person means you are a trusting person, which means that you are, in sense, a vulnerable person. Okay. But in some sense, especially if you want to progress, that is required. Okay, so there's the story of Hecuba. Hecuba is basically, long story short, is she trusts a friend. Sort of a war breaks out, so you get this relapse into the state of nature. She trusts a friend to take care of her child, and she has to leave. And when she returns, she realizes that basically, the friend has compromised the child safely, has stolen, and has run away, and the child is dead. And so that trusting, that willingness to trust, which makes you a good person. When you lose that, we sort of revert back to a certain kind of animality. Okay, so at the end, I think she gouges the eyes out of. She finds her friend and exacts revenge. And there's something good about revenge sometimes, but what you have is she reverts into a kind of an animal. She becomes a kind of a dog. There's something we've failed as humans to not live up to that potential. And Aristotle would agree with that. We want to fulfill our potential. Okay, let me conclude that there, and we'll get on to the presentations. Any questions or comments with regards to that?